Cup of coffee in hand, so let me say hello and good evening. Good evening, Mr. Speaker.
How are you?
I'm very well. Nice to see you too, sir. Nice to see you. Sorry we haven't got better weather for you today.
Oh, it's all right. It's great to be here.
We're going to get straight into it, if that's okay. You've described this as the most important election since 1860. Do you feel the Republic is at stake this time?
I think there's an enormous difference between a world in which Barack Obama gets reelected and therefore believes that his radical values and his radical appointments have been validated, and a world in which he is repudiated decisively and America moves back towards a country of American exceptionalism and the work ethic and decentralization away from Washington. I think it's an enormous difference in which future we live in.
Mm-hmm. This election is clearly, like all elections, is going to be about the economy because it always ultimately is about the economy. Why should voters pick you over one of your Republican colleagues?
Well, I worked with Ronald Reagan in the late 70s and early 80s on an economic program of lower taxes, less regulation, more American energy, and favoring the people who actually create jobs. And under Reagan, we created 1,100,000 new jobs in 1 month, September 1983. And if you applied the Reagan recovery to today, it would be about 25 million jobs over 7 years. As Speaker, I took exactly the same playbook from Reagan: lower taxes, less regulation, more American energy, and praising people who create jobs. And in the 4 years I was Speaker, we created 11 million new jobs and unemployment dropped to 4.2%. So I think I can make a pretty good case that I've actually done it, helped do it twice, and that I have a pretty good idea of exactly how to start swinging the economy, and that as a result I believe that we are likely to have a very successful and robust economy.
Okay. Today's show is brought to everybody by Strong America Now, which is the only reason I bring them up is because you have signed their pledge. And part of that pledge is that as president, you'll do 2 days worth of training before anything else happens. That's a highly unusual thing for a president to do. So what made you sign that pledge? Well,
and I also pledged that we would do training for every single presidential appointee. And for the transition team. I took a 60-hour tutorial under Edwards Deming, who was the father of the quality movement. I really do believe that Lean Six Sigma works, that it takes great discipline, that it takes a while to learn it, but that its potential to save $500 billion a year is real, and that its potential to give us dramatically better government agencies is real. And so I'm prepared to say that this is a significant part of what we would do in training our new appointees so we could get a culture across the entire federal government of focusing on effectiveness and on things that work.
Okay. We're possibly as little as 2 weeks away from yet another government shutdown. I know there's a big omnibus spending bill in the works as opposed to a continuing resolution. It would seem that Speaker Boehner understands now he's not going to get that past his own members of the House, and so he looks like he's going to reach across to the Democrats to get this done. When is it going to be time to simply draw a line in the sand and say no?
Well, I can't comment because I'm not part of the negotiations. I'm not up there right now. I can tell you that as president, I would move for dramatically less spending, and I'd be prepared to veto bills that didn't meet that standard. And I would move for very, very large-scale reform. When I was Speaker, we reformed welfare, and 2 out of 3 people either went back to work or went to school. So I do believe that you can have very, very substantial reforms that could be very effective.
Okay. Would you have voted to raise the debt ceiling?
In all probability, I would have at some point because I don't think you can. The debt ceiling is very different than a fight over a government shutdown. The debt ceiling is the credit of the United States, and given the chaos in the world economy right now, I think nobody can tell you what would have happened had the debt ceiling not been raised.
Okay. This morning you signed another pledge, this one on the border fence. Given your other comments on immigration, can you tell us where in your list of priorities you would place sealing that border?
It's if you go to newt.org, my personal website was just my first name.org, it's for my campaign, you'll see that in the proposed 21st century contract with America, we have a commitment to complete control of the border by January 1, 2014. And it's one of the highest items in the entire program.
Okay, so let's talk about immigration. It's obviously a subject close to my own heart, having come in through the front door. The process is horrific, I've got to tell you. I handed over my fingerprints 17 times during the 7.5-year journey to citizenship. I had to take a medical to make sure I didn't have anything communicable, which I completely agree with. It's a throwback to Ellis Island. Only problem with that is I'd been here 3.5 years when I did it. So it's purely about the money. So I believe that we have to simplify the process to come here legally. Where do you stand on that?
Well, first of all, I think you have to control the border, and I think you have to make it easier to get a legal visa and easier to deport people who shouldn't be here. So both need to be improved dramatically over where they are. I believe we ought to have a guest worker program, which I would outsource to American Express, Visa, or MasterCard, so somebody competent was running it. And I think you have to have a commitment that that most of the people who are here illegally are going to leave, but some kind of provision, much like a World War II Selective Service Board, to have a citizen review panel that would certify people if they clearly have ties here, have been obeying the law for a long time, have family here, and if they have a family that will sponsor them, then they ought to have some ability to get a residency permit, but not a direct path to citizenship.
Okay. Before we take a very short time out for some traffic and weather and stuff, I just want to ask you a very quick question. Border Patrol agent Jesus Diaz, who you and I have discussed before, he's now in jail for what amounts to excessive use of handcuffs. Governor Perry has gone on the record with me saying that as president, he would pardon this agent. Can you match that pledge?
Well, I can't match the pledge because I haven't reviewed it, but I can promise you that we would review it the first day, and we would. I would want to seriously consider pardoning him on the very first day, but okay. I would want to have it reviewed and not just, on a radio show make a commitment.
We were talking about the Border Patrol, and yesterday the White House sealed the file on the murdered Border Patrol agent, Brian Terry, which was, to me anyway, a bizarre action. He's the guy that was murdered with our guns in the Fast and Furious operation.
I don't understand how they can seal the file, and I would hope that the appropriate congressional committee would subpoena the records and reopen it, because it makes you wonder what the motivation of the White House is in blocking us from learning how an American agent was killed by American weapons based on a botched Obama administration operation.
It really is a scary thing, especially as it happened with the defense thing that went through yesterday with the whole 7 days of food makes you a suspected terrorist bill that went through. It is very scary. I was going to ask you if, as president, if it was still sealed, whether you would unseal it. I think you just pretty much answered it.
Yeah, again, at a minimum, I would ask independent attorneys to look. I mean, if there's something there that involves security, maybe that component needs to be redacted. But I think the file in general, I can't understand why it would be sealed.
Yeah, it is a very strange thing. So Ron Paul has launched an attack ad on you today. I'm not going to talk about that specifically. Do you think it's legitimate for GOP candidates to go after each other in this way, or should everyone be adhering to Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment?
Well, I mean, candidates have the right to do it, but I think the voters punish them for it. I think Ronald Reagan was right, the 11th commandment that said don't attack each other. But in addition, the voters this year want us to focus on Barack Obama.
Yes.
The voters are eager for Republicans to stay positive. Every candidate who's engaged in attacking another candidate has lost ground.
Yes.
And I can tell you that the Newt 2012 has two principles. We're going to be positive about solutions, and we're going to focus on Barack Obama as our only opponent. And I'm not going to get engaged in fighting with other Republicans. I think that's a huge mistake on their part. They can run the campaign they want to run. I'm not going to run that kind of campaign.
You see, I actually think that's part of the reason you've surged in the polls, to be perfectly honest with you. Your performance in some of those debates, there was one particular example when they asked you to comment on something about Governor Romney, and you simply said no. It was a wonderful moment. It really was. It was very, very refreshing.
Well, it's so obvious that the elite media is eager to start fights among Republicans to keep us from focusing on Barack Obama. And I don't think it's helpful for some Republicans and their consultants to decide that's what they want to do. But on the other hand, I can sympathize that if you look at the most recent polls, I suspect they think they have to do something. My only advice would be figure out what your best positive is and try to attract people to you. I mean, candidates need to focus on their growing, not trying to shrink their competitor.
Yeah, because you were down there. I mean, you were down at the bottom end at one point in this race, and you never went into that attack
Simon,
mode.
You're right. Well, you're exactly right.
Last time I spoke to you,
I can speak with authority about being at the bottom of the list because I was there.
Yes. But you never went down that road of attacking.
No, I thought it was counterproductive. I thought it was wrong in terms of the history of Ronald Reagan and the 11th Commandment, and I thought it was bad politics because in this particular year, the combination of genuine fear about the economy and genuine anger at Obama brings Republican voters, I think, to really, really want a candidate who's both positive and who is focused on Barack Obama as the only opponent. We're going to keep doing that. People can go to newt.org. They will see tons of material that is positive, that are idea-oriented, that are designed to get us back on track. And they'll see a real contrast with Obama, but they won't see very much about my competitors.
Okay. How large a role should government have in healthcare?
Well, I think that it depends on what level of government you're talking about. I mean, for example, we want clean water, which relates directly to health because getting rid of cholera, dysentery, diarrhea, typhoid is a big deal. We want to make sure that if a drug is supposed to be Lipitor, that it's really Lipitor, because otherwise you can kill people by selling counterfeit drugs.
Okay.
So we want to know that if somebody says that they're a neurosurgeon, they're actually a neurosurgeon.
Yes, that would be useful.
I mean, there's a certain zone of guaranteeing safety and guaranteeing honesty that you can't get out of. I think beyond that, we want a tax code which makes it as easy as possible for every American to be part of the health system, but we want it to be much more open than it is today. Okay. Because there are many different formulas you can use to provide good health care, and we've increasingly, we've increasingly narrowed down to a one-size-fits-all insurance model that, in fact, doesn't work very well, is unnecessarily expensive, and diverts a tremendous amount of money away from doctors, nurses, pharmacies, hospitals, towards bureaucrats, whether they're insurance company bureaucrats or they're government bureaucrats.
I've said myself, healthcare needs reform. There's no question it needs reform. But I guess what I was aiming at was, should government run healthcare in the way it does, say, in Britain?
Well, I mean, first of all, when you think about the U.S. government, what is it that we do, other than fighting wars, what is it that we do well enough that you would like that done to you if you needed an operation? I mean, it just strikes me that there is zero evidence. The government can shape the environment in which the market works, and that goes all the way back to Alexander Hamilton. But the government trying to do it, I mean, we didn't create a federal department of railroad construction.
Nope.
We had incentives for building railroads, but the private sector built them. We didn't create a federal department of running airlines. Okay. We created we had an airline postage subsidy so that airmail actually subsidized the growth of airlines. But we then had private companies out there competing to deliver the service. And I think one of the great reasons that we're now in such bad shape in space is that we turned it over to a bureaucracy at NASA who have just been absolutely terrible about getting the right kind of program in space.
Truly scary, our position in space. Just the last question on healthcare. If you become president, would you veto funding for Planned Parenthood?
I would transfer the funding for Planned Parenthood to an adoption service so that young women have an alternative that is life. And I would absolutely zero out any funding for Planned Parenthood, which is the largest provider of abortion services in the United States.
The Global Warming Conference is taking place right now in South Africa. Do you believe, excuse me, you got me doing it now, do you believe global warming is actually taking place?
I don't know.
Okay.
I believe that there are a substantial number of scientists who believe it is. There are a minority but significant number of scientists who believe it isn't. The most recent measurements at CERN, the large European Physics Center in Switzerland, came back and said that the computer models are off, by at least a factor of 4 on how much energy leaves the Earth. And I'm an amateur paleontologist. I was recently at the Field Museum in Chicago, and I was looking at dinosaurs from the Antarctic. Now, since you currently have about a mile-thick ice cap over the Antarctic, it's clear the planet was dramatically warmer when there were dinosaurs there. So I'm not at all, would not be surprised that the climate was changing. I have no idea whether that's because of the sun, because of other factors we don't understand, or because of human behavior. What I am sure of is that there is no justification for turning power over to EPA to micromanage the economy in the name of a computer theory.
If even if it's taking place, let's say it's taking place, let's say it's man-made for the sake of argument, are we conceited enough to think we can change the planet? I mean, is it not just going to work itself out? Well, that would be a sign we would change the planet, but it would raise two questions.
Yeah. If you stipulate humans can decide temperature, what's the right temperature? I mean, you know, I'm always amazed.
Please don't let's ever have a government committee on that.
No,
please.
I mean, I'm always amazed when the Norwegian Prime Minister worries about warming, because you know it's really cold most of the year.
Yes.
But there's a second question, which is, if you notice the Dutch response to the ocean has been to build dikes, not to lower the ocean.
Yes. Exactly right.
And Al Gore would have come along. If Al Gore had been a Dutch politician, he would have announced a multi-trillion-dollar job to get the ocean to be lowered, rather than building dikes. I mean, it's just if you think about it for a little while, so even if it turns out, whether for man-made reasons or non-man-made reasons, that the Earth is warming, it may be radically cheaper to ameliorate the effect than it is to stop the effect.
To try and stop the effect, yeah. The biggest problem I've got is that we here in the United States, and you know a few other countries as well, but certainly nowhere near the majority of the globe, seem to be taking the economic impact of trying to hold back the oceans. I'm reminded of a famous king, as opposed to the entire world. We can't do it on our own because air moves. Look, so does temperature.
Look, when I was speaker when the Kyoto conference occurred, I sent a team to Kyoto to watch Gore, who led a team. And our team came back and said this was a fiasco. The Europeans designed the Kyoto protocols to cripple the American economy. And they bought in China and India by promising them that none of it applied to them. So you had Gore on behalf of an American administration accepting an anti-American treaty, which did not affect the two countries that were going to grow the most, and which gave the Europeans a net competitive advantage. And it's why when you got to the Senate, the vote was 99-0 against doing it, including John Kerry, who voted no. Now, if something's too liberal for John Kerry,
before he was for it?
No, in this case, I think he was against it before he was for it. But I would just suggest to you something too liberal for John Kerry. Is something pretty easy to oppose.
There you go. Speaker Gingrich, thank you so much for stopping by. Always fun indeed.
Look forward to be back.
I'll see you at dinner later on this evening.